So, Deltarune Chapter 5 comes out on the 24th, and I still haven't even made a video on 3 and 4 yet. Well, I guess in the wake of this announcement, I think it's time to return to my previous theory and give it a bit of a revamp, with the evidence provided in Chapter 3 and 4, then work that theory into my now Chapter 5 predictions. In my previous video, I made the claim that Deltarune is Undertale Backwards, which, if you haven't seen that video, that's fine. I'll recap it and go over the most damning evidence again in this one. But oh boy, in the wake of Chapters 3 and 4 does that video hold up. Mostly. If you ignore the entire second half of the video where I suddenly go on a tirade about Kara. But my core argument of Deltarune being the inverse of Undertale, well, these chapters have done wonders for that idea. And I would even go as far as to say have confirmed it. Deltarune is chock full of parallels between its story and Undertale's, and the thing is, these parallels are not random. The parallels pretty perfectly demonstrate that Deltarune's story is a reflection and inverse of the story of Undertale. To prove this, let's look at the very last thing in Undertale. No, not that. Not even that. That. Our meeting with Kara, where we, the soul, sit in an empty void at the end of the world and speak to the one character that can truly see beyond the bounds of the game. A character who is self-described to be a demon, offering us an option of which our choices do not matter, climaxing in the destruction of the world. Then, there's its perfect parallel. The beginning of Deltarune opens up with us, the soul, speaking to the one character who can truly see beyond the bounds of the game, within a void of almost total darkness. Gaster, a character who is repeatedly associated with the demonic number, who offers us choices that do not matter. But rather than choices that lend to destruction, they're choices that lend into creation. A reflection, a parallel, but also an opposite. Then we wake up in our bed on the surface. Tutorial. This also being the very last scene of the pacifist run of Undertale. And with this, dear viewer, I think you should be starting to see what I see. This trend, however, does not end here. It persists throughout the entire game, and I intend to prove this without a shadow of a doubt. Let us continue through the events of Deltarune, and watch as it lines up backwards with Undertale. Next, we travel through the town and into school, just as the True Pacifist credits would showcase. We go to the closet and fall far, far, far into the depths of the first Dark World, wherein we encounter none other than Ralsei, the prince who is alone at the edge of deepest dark, whose name is an anagram for Asriel, and who is later shown to be a fluffy goat boy just like him as well. Asriel being the final boss of Undertale, and Ralsei being the first Darkener we meet. It lines up a little too well, because this even goes a step further. After Ralsei joins our team, the first area we enter is called the Field of Hopes and Dreams, Hopes and Dreams being the name of Asriel's battle theme. Then after a bit of shenanigans later, the next big thing we encounter is Card Castle, where we have no other choice but to fight the Chaos King, as unlike every other enemy we've encountered up to this point, he cannot be spared, which shares a rather familiar ring to the battle against Asgore, a king who you have to fight. Though unlike Asgore, who doesn't actually want to kill you but is doing it out of a feeling of obligation, the Chaos King really wants to kill you, but isn't obligated to. And if you fight for long enough in the Chaos King battle, he will actually get too tired to keep fighting. And eventually, after getting faked out, and specifically if you chose violence during the chapter so far, Ralsei will put him to sleep, which just so happens to line up pretty well with another boss that can be encountered in the subsequent area of Undertale during a genocide playthrough instead of a pacifist or neutral. I mean, this can be taken a step further by looking at Jevil. He is once again a boss in the area where you put him to sleep to be beaten. But with Jevil, he's a crazy joker who understands the bounds of his own existence, which is even more similar to Sans during his fight. Then again, you could also point to Jevil's chaotic nature and pair it with Asriel's attacks, Chaos Buster, Chaos Saber, etc. There's also the thing at the end of Chapter 1 where you get to go back and talk to all the friends you've made, just like in Undertale, which is quite a funny connection considering this is the beginning of Deltarune and it really doesn't make sense to be here. That concludes the first chapter of the game, and proceeds to set up exactly how these parallels are distinguished. A ton of stuff that happened within Chapter 1 of Deltarune parallels the events that happen within the city/new home area of Undertale and beyond, which means we can set up our expectations to look a little bit like this. Chapter 2 should be thematically similar to the core, because that's what's before New Home, and also have some parallel to Mettaton, since he's the main boss of the core. And oh, if that isn't the understatement of the century, because while the parallels between Chapter 1 of Deltarune and the ending of Undertale are starkly apparent now, Chapter 2 and its paralleling of the core is what made me realize all of this to begin with. So let's make haste. Chapter 2's Dark World is referred to as Cyber's World, which already kicks us off to a very obvious start, given how Undertale's core is very sci-fi themed, and very techno and technologically based. I mean, it's a giant thermo-energy plant. With the connection becoming even more obvious with the lasers that block your path throughout both the core and parts of Cyberworld being a literal reused asset mostly exclusive to these areas. Honestly, this next connection's a little bit loose, but we also repeatedly find and sift through trash cans in the core, which is weird. But there is a trash zone partway through the second chapter where we encounter characters like Spamton and Trashy. Honestly, the last character I would have thought I would be using in a theory. But that all pales in comparison to the sheer obvious connection between Mettaton and Queen/Spamton. Let's start with Queen. She's a robot with long-heeled legs she uses as part of her attacks, and owns a big mansion. She's our enemy, but also doesn't really want to kill us. She's just doing all this for her nerdy friend that she cares about. She then proceeds to transform into a different, bigger, and stronger robot, of which we in response reveal our own secret weapon to combat it. Oh, and not to mention, the name of her theme, Attack of the Killer Queen, is literally a reference to what Mettaton says before his fight, Attack of the Killer Robot. But Queen doesn't even parallel Mettaton nearly as much as Spamton Neo does. I mean, you can hardly even call this a parallel. Spamton Neo is literally the Neo suit being piloted by someone else, both of whom seek popularity and approval. I mean, you even transform into the Yellow Soul when fighting him, and he attacks you with floating heads, bombs his fucking heart, and they're even both trying to steal your soul for themselves. I mean, Toby genuinely couldn't have made the connection any more blatant. That was all just a recap. But part of the reason I'm making this video is to see how this all holds up with chapters 3 and 4. So let's move right along to chapter 3, which should parallel Hotland and the stuff that happens there. Well, I didn't think this could be any more on the nose. Throughout the entirety of Hotland, Mettaton continuously keeps putting us on TV shows where we have to do stuff like answer quiz questions, bake, or be in a musical, with those things mostly lining up with stuff that Tenna has us do as well. I mean, the entire concept of Tenna is the same as classic Mettaton, being a TV personality. It's silly they even both kind of try and fake us out at the end of their show around, with Mettaton pretending like he's gonna kill us before Alpha stops him last second, and Tenna having to continue to bide time over and over again for the night to show up. We even later on get the chance to give Tenna to Mettaton in the Light World, further displaying their parallels and closing the loop on the connections. Between Tenna being mostly Mettaton Classic, Queen being mostly Mettaton EX, and Spamton being mostly Mettaton Neo. But as I proclaimed in my previous video, Muffet is the final boss of Hotland, and thus should parallel the boss of Chapter 3 by having spider-like qualities. Well, I was half right, because Tenna might not have spider-like qualities, but you know what qualities he does have? Ant-like qualities. He's Mr. Ant Tenna. Ant Tenna. He's just a different kind of bug. Toby himself even shared concept art of Tenna, and look, he was supposed to be way more bug-like. Though, honestly, I think Toby made the right call, because his more bug-like design is a bit uncanny. My thumbnail artist even pointed out how Tenna's nose turns into flowers right before the night kills him, which could very easily tie into how the spiders leave a flower from Muffet when she dies. The connections in this chapter do go beyond Tenna, however. The mini-bosses of both Hotland and TV World are a couple, whom you, the player, need to get together, and that's how you win their fight. Not to mention, it. The water cooler, which in Undertale we use to hydrate Undyne, who shows up right at the end of Chapter 3. With this in mind, there's actually a few things we can hypothesize. For instance, I think it's a pretty safe bet to argue that the bunker may very well parallel the true lab, given its placement at the end of the chapter where the lab should be, and, well, its entire vibe and presumed connection to Gaster. Since this series of events actually seems to line up so well, with Undyne being at the end of Hotland leading into Mettaton, we might actually be able to figure out who the knight is. It would just have to be someone that shows up in Undertale between our departure from Undyne and our meeting of Mettaton. Oh dear lord. Alright, allow me to get a little sidetracked here and hit you with a crackpot theory, of which I can only assume is a first. What if Alphys is the knight? For all intents and purposes, I would have never come to this conclusion, but there she is, right in the middle of Undyne and Mettaton. I mean, she also has a relationship with both Toriel, being her friend, and Undyne, who she has a crush on, potentially explaining why she would be trying to kidnap both. Because in Chapter 4, she talks about how the shelter is to survive an emergency, perhaps an impending doom like the Roaring. And if it's correct that the shelter is the equivalent to the True Lab, well, that's like Alphys's whole area in Undertale, and the presumed base of operations of the Knight. There's even still more parallels in Chapter 3 to consider. I mean, Mettaton is leading you on and pretending to try and kill you under the instruction of Alphys. Meanwhile, the Knight is the one who is instructing Tenna to keep us busy. We also see that a lot of Darkspawn and Darkness-related enemies share similarities with the Amalgamates, which were Alphys creations. I mean, just think about it. Alphys sends us with Susie to the closet, completely ignoring Noelle. Then, when we never return to class, she doesn't even think to try and check on us, somehow continuing class without the chalk that she just said was vital. We can even see that during Chapter 2, after hanging out with Ralsei in Castletown, Alphys is miraculously gone from the classroom, which also happens during Chapter 4 after it begins to rain, giving her plenty of opportunity to be the one going and opening these dark fountains. It has to be her. Toby thought he was so damn sneaky. I mean, who could possibly have guessed the Knight would be Alphys of all people? It's the perfect plot twist! But I saw through it, Toby Fox, you sly bastard! You might have tricked everyone else into thinking it's someone like Carol or Des, but no, not me! I saw through your tricks! Alphys is the Knight! Alphys was always the Knight! Excuse me. I apologize for that. I may have gotten a little carried away. Where were we again? Oh, let's move on to Chapter 4. This chapter should parody Waterfall. Thus, a lot of water, presumably of which is falling, as well as us falling. A decent amount of talk about the prophecy, a spooky mini-boss, a knight who has a penchant for justice and uses the green soul, some darkness-based encounters, maybe a little bit of piano, and, oh yeah, isn't this supposed to be Noelle and Des? Cause if so, the entire beginning of the chapter gives us our biggest insight into both Noelle and Des so far. Then we proceed to do a lot of falling, like a lot of falling, sometimes being pushed down by, you guessed it, falling water. There's literally waterfalls. And we can't forget the mizzles who are made of water. A lot of the puzzles are themed around playing the piano, which is a mechanic only used this one time in Waterfall, I think. Then most of the rest of the puzzles are darkness related, kind of like that one mushroom puzzle. Jackenstein is also the mini-boss of this chapter, and he, just like the dummy, is a sentient, well, dummy. He may be a Halloween decoration instead of a practice dummy, but for all intents and purposes, he is still a dummy. His theme, Dark Zone, even has the ghost fight motif that Dummy has. Then there's the Prophecy. My god, the Prophecy. This chapter is literally titled The Prophecy, and as we progress through it, we are told bit by bit the prophecy. Whereas in Waterfall, it's the same thing. These placards tell us piece by piece the prophecy as we pass them. Then through talking to Gerson in his shop, we learn even more about the prophecy. But of course, that's not the only way Gerson is important. I think the most obvious connection that everyone noticed is not only Gerson being prominent in this chapter, but he takes on the role of Undyne as the hammer of justice to her spear of justice. Her mentor in Undertale, he now mentors Susie in Deltarune. And the kicker is that, like Stampton using the yellow soul, Gerson uses the green one. It lines up just a little too well. It's honestly kind of hard for me to even consider this a theory at this point, given how much direct evidence there is to support it. I mean, Toby Fox even calls Deltarune Undertale's parallel story, and Deltarune has this deep theme of reflections and stories changing throughout time that Toby very clearly thought a lot about. So that begs the question, well, what's next? What does this mean for Chapter 5, 6, and 7? Well, the answer for 5 is pretty easy. It's already hinted that Sans is going to be important in the next chapter, and if we expect the secret boss to carry on the soul mode theme, then it's a pretty safe bet to say that Sans may very well be the secret boss. Either him or Papyrus, who will likely finally show up in the next chapter during the festival. I also wouldn't be surprised at all if it ended up snowing next chapter during the festival, at least on the weird route, to both play into Snowdin and the theme of snow being built up the last few chapters, with some likely big weird route implications. And considering the next chapter is probably going to be in the flower shop, those people who say that Asgore's TV is going to be a darkener might be onto something. Maybe the mini-boss. We'll probably even finally enter Sans of Papyrus' house. Plus, that one golfing game and the soul colors might tie into the soul-colored flowers in Asgore's shop. Oh, and there's going to be dogs. Like, a lot of dogs. I mean, there's gotta be. And since Snowdin's a forest, we might even go into the forest. Which you probably know is very, very interesting. At least that's what I was going to say before the trailer dropped. But then I noticed something. Obviously, the trailer doesn't give us enough to really say for certain if all the stuff I'd previously stated will happen or not, aside from the thing about the soul colors, which definitely seems to be happening. But this guy, the flower one, that's a Rudin. And that grass is just a recolored version of the grass from the Fields of Hopes and Dreams. Plus the fact that the surrounding area is just void and the sliding down beanstalk. We also know that Asgore's gonna be the boss of this chapter, thanks to the prophecy, and since he's the Flower King, he's probably gonna be in a castle. I mean, for how short this trailer is, there's a lot of things that can be tied back to specifically Chapter 1, which actually makes a ton of sense, because in Undertale, New Home is a copy of the ruins. And we've already established that New Home is equivalent to Chapter 1, so having the Deltarune version of the ruins parallel Chapter 1 makes a ton of sense. But why would Chapter 5 be the ruins? Chapter 6 should be the ruins, and Chapter 5 should be Snowdin. Otherwise, it breaks the pattern. So, like, what the hell is going on? Well, allow me to take a shot in the dark here. I think there may be 2 dark fountains in this chapter. But unlike Chapter 4, where they were all in the church, I think this time it might be split up. One in Flower King, obviously, but also a dark world before that one that's in Noelle's house. I know it's a shot in the dark, but I feel like it makes a lot of sense. I mean, Noelle will be with us sometime during the festival, and last chapter, Chris and Susie failed to get the shelter code from the guitar, so it stands to reason that Susie would want to go back for it. But this time, a dark world stands prepared in their way. A dark world completely themed around Christmas and thus would parallel Snowdin, with the secret boss somewhere still having the blue soul mode. After all, the trailer does say new adventures are blooming. Adventures, plural. Let's talk a little bit more about these ruins connections, though, because it would line up to have Asgore be the boss in parallel to Toriel, for, I feel like, obvious reasons, in addition to the seemingly important basement that both Home and Flower King have, with Toriel's basement leading to... oh. You. Slapped right in between Snowdin and the ruins, and also appearing before the ruins, but we can ignore that for now, is you. Flowey. We need to talk about the Flowey-shaped elephant in the room. Flowey is an interesting case, but I think I do have an idea of whom he's supposed to parallel. It would most likely be Friend. I mean, the connections aren't too hard to parse. Both are clearly evil and are trying to push us to be evil. They have connections to the Amalgamates, Friend potentially being a servant to Gaster, and Flowey being a servant to Kara. Both stalk you throughout your adventure and seem to be manipulating things behind the scenes, with the kicker being Flowey's theme titled Your Best Friend, which becomes your best nightmare when fighting Omega Flowey. And we know that Friend and the Dark Worlds in general are deeply intertwined with the idea of nightmares. Am I implying we are going to fight Friend during Chapter 5? Before the trailer dropped, no, but I think I may have been swayed. I'm still leaning towards it being Chapter 6, with the very first Flowey encounter being before the ruins, and thus, for Deltarune, after their equivalent. But given the theming, I honestly would not be surprised. Mainly because, well, this is one of Omega Flowey's attacks. It's a solo Chris fight, and I just got done saying that Friend is the equivalent to Flowey. Speaking of that attack from the trailer, though, I only just realized Omega Flowey has a TV for a head, and there's a fucking TV there. Plus the soul flowers. So either we are literally just fighting Omega Flowey this chapter, or we are about to fight, I don't know, Omega Friend. Either way, I'm so fucking excited. That just leaves chapters 6 and 7, and given we've used up pretty much everything in Undertale, there are only 2 things I can possibly think of. Maybe chapter 6 is the True Lab, aka the Shelter, and chapter 7 is what's left before the ruins, an encounter with Flowey, and Frisk falling into the underground, landing on Kara's grave and awakening them, as well as somehow obtaining the soul. This, in reverse, is exactly how I think the prophecy is going to end. I think the prophecy is that Chris is going to have to sacrifice himself and the soul in order to prevent the roaring. But we, the soul, would know this, having played through the normal route, which is why we pursue the weird route in an attempt to circumvent it, to prevent Chris from using our power to create light to its depletion, by instead making Noelle strong enough to do it, and sacrificing her instead.